A breathless hush seemed to drape itself over the small village like a pall, broken only by the anxious whispers of parents whose children glanced nervously at the looming woods beyond the fields. People went about their tasks with furtive quickness, as though sprinting to finish errands before nightfall forced them to lock doors and shutter windows. Long, twisted branches straggled over the path that led from the fields to the forest, a foreboding archway where light dared not linger. No bird songs were heard from the treetops, no squirrel chatter. It was a place where even the wind seemed swallowed by shadows. The forest stood in a silent watch, thick and dark, as though waiting to draw yet another unsuspecting soul into its coiled depths. I first noticed the new hush in the community when I arrived at the inn after my long journey. I had come to investigate the disappearance of 3 children, siblings named Mila, Aaron, and Peta, who had entered the forest one evening on a childish dare and never returned. No trace of footsteps or clothing, nothing. Just the tearful recollections of a neighbor boy who claimed he had watched them step, giggling, under the shadow of those twisted boughs. And then they were gone. Within hours of my arrival, an old woman named Tessa, skin withered like parchment, approached me on the inn's porch. "It's the forest that devours," she said, knitting trembling fingers around her walking stick. "Our old stories speak of an entity there, older than these trees. It's hungry for innocence, yearning to weave hearts and minds into its vines. Like many in villages haunted by folklore, Tessa wore her superstitions openly, but her words carried a sincerity that pulled at my chest. One look in her eyes revealed horror that had transcended generations. She told me that she had lost a sibling in the forest as a child. She had ventured to the edge of the woods with him to collect berries and mushrooms, but one moment of inattention was all it took. She turned her back for a moment, and when she whirled around, he was gone. The undergrowth re-knitting itself to hide the path he had taken. Ever since, she had sworn that the rustle of vines and creeping brambles in the breeze was a child's voice, subtly chanting for help. It didn't take long for the rumors to swirl in my mind. Tales of a grasping entity that collected children like prize blossoms, absorbing their souls and entombing them in the labyrinth of vines that sprawled just beyond sight. Each missing child left behind a new coil of living greenery, gossip said. Some insisted at night they glimpsed shadowy shapes flitting between the tree trunks, smaller forms reaching out with ghostly fingers glazed in moonlight. I found myself both bewitched and unsettled by these accounts. That evening, I walked to the forest edge at dusk, accompanied by the local blacksmith, Tomas, whose large frame belied his gentle spirit. With broad shoulders and a salt and pepper beard, he gripped a torch to ward off the swelling darkness. As we stepped beneath the first domed canopy of interlaced branches, the entire air shifted. The shrubs, bracken, and vines that swayed in the periphery seemed to press in, closing off the trail. A heavy, musky scent of damp earth mingled with something floral yet pungent, like a sickly sweet perfume that hovered around unseen blossoms. We advanced slowly, mindful not to stray from our small footpath. Our flickering torchlight revealed twisted root systems that all but erupted from the soil. The deeper we ventured, the more the path appeared to vanish. Our progress was cut short when we collided with an impenetrable wall of thick vines. They were braided into a gate-like structure and seemed to pulsate slightly, as though each twining rope was alive and coiling in slow, rhythmic contractions. I reached out, heart hammering, to touch one of the vines. At the instant contact of my fingertips, the vine jerked away, as though recoiling from the flame. My mouth went dry. Tomas grunted warily. "We should get back," he muttered. "This is no place for us at night." I nodded, grateful that he spoke first. Though I came to investigate, I could not deny the relief I felt at turning around. I sensed the pulsing gloom trailing us, as if the forest were tasting our fear. We quickened our pace until we again saw the faint lights of the village through the thinning trees. A sudden hush enveloped us, a suffocating quiet. Even the usual night insects refused to chirp. The next day, I sought out more witnesses. The caretaker of the village's modest library recounted local lore, rummaging through dusty tomes. One was a journal from an early settler who wrote of a wriggling phantom in the woods that sought out children and entrapped them in vines that sprouted from its body. The text was incomplete, with entire pages mysteriously torn out. Still, the caretaker's glare told me all I needed. This legend was deeply ingrained, treated as both allegory and stark reality. A small group of townsfolk met that afternoon in a cramped wooden chapel that served as the community's only gathering hall. Families held each other as they exchanged worried updates. More sightings of strange creeping vines near the meadows, more glimpses of fleeting childlike figures at dusk. No one had the courage to enter the forest anew, not after entire search parties had returned empty-handed and disturbed. All they could do was gather behind locked doors after dark, waiting for a solution that never came. Guilt gnawed at me, for I had offered them hope that my presence would unravel this grim tapestry. Yet I had accomplished little more than verifying the grim reality they already knew. Seeking any advantage, I borrowed an oil lantern, a coil of rope, and a small iron-tipped staff, hoping these meager tools might protect me against the unknown. At first light, I would embark on a more thorough survey of the forest's boundaries. Dawn arrived with slate-gray clouds that threatened rain. From the forest edge, I scanned for any semblance of a path. The vegetation remained thick, but I noticed something distressingly new. At certain intervals between the mossy trunks, clusters of vines formed hollow spaces, almost like archways. They dotted the forest's perimeter, forming curved passages, each large enough for a person to slip through. It seemed as though the forest had grown corridors overnight, beckoning travelers inward. My stomach lurched as a breeze stirred between those openings, carrying a faint whisper that sounded eerily like children's laughter. I approached the nearest archway, heart pounding. The vines and brambles parted as though granting me permission to enter. Summoning courage, I took a steadying breath and stepped forward. Shadows enveloped me. A labyrinth of towering oaks and ash seemed to converge, their trunks so close that they formed crooked aisles of gloom. Once again, I detected that floral, cloying perfume. It seemed stronger here, and the vines underfoot were slick with dew. The hush weighed down, thick as fog. Step by step, I ventured deeper until the forest swallowed all traces of daylight. My lantern provided a trembling circle of light, illuminating a narrow swath of ground ahead. Every so often, I heard faint rustling overhead, as though something gently glided across a high canopy of vines. I did not notice the figure until it almost stood in my path. My light flickered, and I stifled a gasp. A child, small and slight, stood facing away from me, dressed in ragged clothes, hair plastered to a gaunt face. At first, I thought I had found Mila, Aaron, or Peta, but the whispering voice that exhaled from those pale lips froze my blood. "They're chained to the vines. Please, free them," the child said in a hollow rasp. Slowly, her head turned my way, revealing eyes clouded by a milky film. As though unseeing, her face bore streaks of dirt and something dark and wet that clung to her jawline. Where are they?" I managed, wanting to help, but as I moved closer, she let out a low, rattling noise, and the vines overhead seemed to tremble. An instant later, she darted away, faster than any living child I'd seen, twisting through the gloom. I rushed after her, calling out for her to wait. Her small footsteps pattered along some hidden path, and I struggled to keep up, guided only by flickers of movement in the dense undergrowth. My heart hammered, and sweat gathered on my brow as the chase led me deeper into regions unknown. Abruptly, the child halted in a small clearing, and I nearly collided with her. The ground was lit by a faint glow that filtered through a breach in the canopy. The vines here were thicker and more numerous, looping around the sturdier trunks and creeping in from every direction. Some grew off the forest floor, slithering across the ground as though alive. Standing in the clearing, as if carved from the heart of the gloom, was a massive gnarled tree. The trunk was crooked, Its bark cracked and furrowed into patterns resembling anguished faces. At the center was a jagged fissure, wide enough to swallow a person. A dull green light emanated from inside, pulsating in time with something like a heartbeat. I could almost feel it reverberate in my chest. The child stopped, trembling. Slowly she turned toward me again, and though her eyes were veiled by that eerie whiteness, I sensed awareness behind them. "There and there," she whispered, pointing at the tree's gaping maw. "She's winding them through the roots. If you don't free them soon, they'll become part of her forever." I echoed, voice quivering. The child nodded. "She's the forest. She's the vines. She devours." As those words left her lips, slender tendrils extended across the ground, reaching for her ankles. She let out a sharp gasp, as though the sudden movement caused her pain. In a flash, she was dragged backward by the vines, no time to even scream. In seconds, the clearing was empty again, and I heard wet slithers receding into the undergrowth. A wave of horror rolled through me. The place felt thick with a hungry presence, and I realized I was close to the source of this evil. Nora, the seamstress's daughter, had told me of a watchman who once glimpsed a vaguely female figure in the forest, a curved silhouette of vines and branches that slipped away into the thick brambles. Could these tales be true? Had the forest itself taken on a shape, perpetually hungry for the innocence of children? I knew retreat was the sensible choice, but the recollection of the missing children steeled me. I advanced into the clearing, raising my lantern high, searching for any sign of life. Thin rivulets of muddy water laced the ground, and that pungent perfume saturated the air. I stepped closer to the tree. The opening in its trunk flickered with that dim green glow, and my heart hammered. From within, I heard soft whining, like the mewling of frightened puppies. It sounded heartbreakingly childlike. I stepped inside. Darkness swallowed me for a moment, the lantern's flame revealing a hollow interior of thick, ropey bark. The space expanded, forming a twisting corridor of living wood. Vines ran through the walls like veins. In the far reaches of the trunk's interior, faint orbs of light drifted, revealing silhouettes of small, motionless figures. I moved forward carefully, trying to keep my breathing steady despite the reek of damp decay. Closer now, I saw them, 3 children suspended against the curved walls, vines threaded around their limbs and torsos. Their eyes were wide, pupils dilated in terror, but they barely seemed conscious. Dancing in the gloom, wraith-like, were greenish tendrils, swaying as though orchestrated by an unseen conductor. I recognized their faces from the villagers' descriptions. Mila's brown hair was matted with filth, and little Petta's cheeks were tear-streaked. Aaron, the eldest, hung just a foot off the ground, his head lolling from side to side as though in delirium. My stomach tightened at the sight. I reached out to touch Mila's pale cheek. At my gentle contact, her eyes half-focused, and she let out a croaking whisper of my name, which should have been impossible, as we had never met. Summoning what courage remained, I tried to loosen the vines that constrained her, but they tightened. As if awakened, a sense of malevolence rippled through the corridor, and I felt the living tree itself shift as though it had a spine. The children shuddered, eyes rolling back in their heads. Then a voice, a whisper so soft it might have been the wind. "They are mine," it hissed. "I feed on their essence. They will become part of my forest, my children of the vine." I recoiled. Who are you?" my question echoed. A figure seemed to coalesce from the swirl of dim light in the trunk's center. It was formed of writhing vines that stretched together into the shape of a tall, thin woman. Her features were carved by twisting, thorn-laden stems, and her eyes glowed with an eldritch luminescence. A sense of ancient, otherworldly power rolled from her in crashing waves. "I am the keeper," she said, her voice a smooth, seductive rustle, like leaves stirring in the wind. "Long have I watched over this land. Once, the children came willingly for safety and warmth. Over time, the people forgot our pact. They scorn the forest. But the forest never forgets. I draw them in, weaving their innocence into my being, giving them eternal rest among my vines. Through them I endure. With trembling hands I brandished my lantern, the only source of light in this suffocating darkness. "Release them!" I pleaded, voice cracking on the edge of fear and anger. I glanced at the children who hung limp. The entity's vine-lipped mouth curled into what might have been a smile. They are bound. Their souls feed the green. All that withers can sprout anew in my realm. You cannot sever what is already entwined. A furious resolve sparked in me. I had come too far to simply accept this monstrous fate. I slung the coil of rope off my shoulder, uncertain how it might help, and took the iron-tipped staff in both hands. I stepped toward the children, intending to pry the vines. The entity's shimmering eyes narrowed, and in an instant, thick tendrils lashed out of the walls, wrapping around my staff and yanking it from my grasp. My limbs flailed as more vines seized my wrists and ankles. In it, I felt the shift of living wood behind me, guiding me backward until I, too, was pressed against the hallway's curved surface. The bark bit into my back as the vines fastened around my torso. My lantern clattered to the ground, extinguishing in a gout of oily smoke. Darkness closed in. Within that sudden blackness, my breath and the slow drip of water from the trunk's interior were the only sounds. Something brushed my cheek. I struggled, but the more I fought, the tighter the vines became, pressing against my ribs, until each breath was an effort. Slowly, I sensed another presence near me. The shimmer of the unnaturally glowing eyes drew close in the dark, and I felt an icy finger. A single vine slide across my forehead. I understood with awful clarity that this entity was tasting me, testing the resilience of my mind. Images burst across my consciousness. The final memories of children woven into the vines, smiling at fields of wildflowers, laughing under a summer sun. Then abrupt terror as twisted branches closed in. Whimpers, cries, a desperate yearning for parents never to be seen again. The forest's malice devoured all. My heart thundered in my chest. For an instant, I felt what it was to be part of that thicket of souls. A shared consciousness, an eternal sense of entrapment. With a raw snarl, I reached into that well of terror and found my fury. Summoning all my will, I strained an arm free, ignoring the searing pain as thorns scraped my skin. My fingers found the lamp's fuel canister, still miraculously within reach. Sharp, barbed vines slashed at my hand, but I clutched the canister tight. In the darkness, I fumbled for the flint striker in my pocket. My limbs felt half suffocated, blood pounding in my ears. At last, a spark flickered. The canister caught, and a sudden tongue of flame ignited, sending bright illumination across the interior. The entity shrieked, an unholy screech resonating off the trunk's walls. In that glaring burst, I saw the vines recoil as green sap oozed from the bark in rivulets, as though the living wood itself were bleeding. I seized my chance and hurled the flaming canister at the entity's writhing shape. Fire licked hungrily at the vines. The shriek redoubled, shaking the ground like a quake. The corridor erupted in chaos as the vines flailed wildly, rearing back from the flames. Seizing the moment, I tore myself free, ignoring the agony of the barbs that ripped my flesh. I scrambled to the children, painfully pulling the burning vines away from their limp bodies. With every ripping motion, I felt the forest's fury intensify. A fierce wind roared through the hollow trunk, and the bark beneath my feet cracked in protest. I managed to loosen the vines from Aaron, Mila, and Peta. Each child slumped into my trembling arms. Though barely conscious, they moaned softly, eyes fluttering with renewed life. The flicker of flame was spreading, tongues of fire dancing up the trunk's interior. The vine woman reeled, an infernal mixture of screams and howling wind issuing from her shapeless face. She was weakened but not yet undone. Her presence battered at my mind, seeking to paralyze me. But the children's faint cries anchored me. Digging deep, I dragged them toward the entrance. A section of bark collapsed beneath a scorching blaze, forcing us to slip through an erratic gap, stumbling out onto the forest floor. A storm of sparks rained down as the entity's fury convulsed the wood around us. Vines shot forward like whips, each strike glancing off the ground inches from our feet. I shielded the children until, at last, we burst out of the trunk's labyrinth and into the clearing. Outside, the sky glowed with the dim light of midday, filtered through cloud cover. The clearing was alive with frantic vines writhing as the massive tree belched thick smoke. The entity's howls reverberated through the orchard of twisted trunks around us. I gathered the children onto shaky feet, coaxing them to move. We had to run. Even as the ground quaked, we raced from the clearing, away from that monstrous tree. My lungs burned with each step, but relief flared within me as we neared the forest edge. Branches lashed at us, and thorny undergrowth tried to trip our feet, but the flames seemed to distract the forest's malignant will, fueling its wrath against the intruder in its core. Thick plumes of smoke began to coil upward, smothering the labyrinth in an ashen haze. At last we broke free of the dense trees, stumbling into the open fields beyond. A collective wail of anguish reverberated behind us, trailing off into a tortured shriek as the forest reeled under its own blaze. Once we reached the fields, the children collapsed, and the villagers, who had seen the haze and heard the commotion, rushed to our side. Their shocked faces turned to amazement when they recognized those so recently feared lost. The blacksmith, Tomas, arrived first, pressing a canteen of water into my hands. Others joined, hugging the children, tears streaming down faces. They asked a torrent of questions, but I could scarcely answer. I was bruised and bleeding, my exhaustion almost overwhelming. We tended to the children through the evening, soothing them with warm blankets, boiled broth, and the dim, comforting glow of lanterns in the chapel. Though dazed, in time they regained enough awareness to whisper haltingly of their ordeal, how the vines had whispered secrets, how they had felt their souls being drawn out, thread by thread. The villagers listened in horror, their hearts torn. Prayers were muttered, offerings of gratitude given, that the children returned at all. That night, a storm swept through. Rain hammered the thatched rooftops relentlessly, thunder shaking the earth. I gazed from the inn's window across the field to the forest's edge, where a sullen glow still flickered, the last remnants of the fire. Occasional lightning illuminated the black skeletons of trees, bending and bowing under the downpour. The storm's fury lasted until dawn, as though determined to purge the land of the forest's lingering horrors. When morning arrived, I joined a wary band of villagers at the forest's perimeter. The once imposing wall of greenery was scorched, with only pockets of charred trunks standing upright. The ground was a morass of black sludge, sizzling where lingering embers smoked under the drizzle. A hush blanketed the area, but it was a calmer silence than before. No primeval malice breathed in the wind. It was instead a silence of grief, perhaps, as though the forest itself mourned the atrocity that had ended with fire. The twisted archways had collapsed into heaps of cinders, no longer opening to lure passers-by. As we ventured a short distance in, we discovered that the massive tree at the clearing's center was all but collapsed, a burned husk. When a breeze jostled the charred branches, they fell away in brittle shards. There among the rubble were vine skeletons, curled around lumps of blackened bark. The once living corridors had disintegrated into ashen piles. Of the female vine mainspring, there was no sign. Only a scorched outline near the trunk, as though she had dissolved in the blaze. Though the immediate threat seemed gone, an undercurrent of unease lingered among us. We could not forget that the children's souls had been tied to this forest, and the old myths warned that such an ancient presence rarely vanished without a trace. The children seemed safe for now, safe and whole, if shaken by nightmares that would likely never fully fade. Parents held them close, as if fearful they might vanish again should they loosen their grip. Weeks passed. Under watchful eyes, villagers returned to fields and chores, while the charred trees stood in condemnation, a graveyard for a verdant labyrinth. The children slowly resumed their routines, playing in the village square, helping with small tasks. Yet sometimes, when the wind stirred just right, they would pause, heads cocked, as if listening for a voice that no one else could hear. I suspected that a part of the forest hold might remain, forging a bond deeper than any root. I prepared to leave the village eventually, assured that the threat was diminished if not entirely extinct. Gathering my bag at the inn, I saw the old woman, Tessa, watching me from the hearth. Without a word, she handed me a small pouch of dried herbs. "Protective," she whispered, "in case the forest spirit lingers in your dreams." Her gaze seemed far away, perhaps recalling her own lost sibling. Late afternoon saw me walking from the village, the shadow of the scorched forest at my back. Every footstep forward carried me away from the realm of twisted vines, though not from the memories. I glanced over my shoulder once, spotting a flicker of green among the dark stumps, some new shoot experimenting with life in the black soil. A subtle chill raced along my spine. The forest would regrow in time, so would the legends. Yet, for now, the children were safe. The forest's ancient power had been wounded, forced into hibernation. Whether it would truly lie dormant forever was anyone's guess. The memory of the entity's voice, as cold as winter wind, echoed in my mind. I devour, I endure. I walked faster, loosening my grip on the past, but never forgetting how easily innocence could be bound by those whispering vines.